Today we're looking at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, I'd love to see your answer to question number 5 in the comments below. So in September of 1862, General Robert E. Lee and his Confederate Army of Northern Virginia had attempted an invasion onto northern soil by marching into Maryland in what became known as the Maryland Campaign. And so in this campaign, they had been halted at the Battle of Antietam, and Lee's weak army had to retreat back into Virginia. Now, the Union Army of the Potomac, which had stopped Lee at Antietam, was under the command of General George McClellan. Now, after the Battle of Antietam, McClellan had refused to pursue and attack the weak Confederate Army. And President Abraham Lincoln was absolutely furious with this, especially after the failure of the Peninsula Campaign in 1862, and now McClellan refusing to attack the Confederates when they were weak. And so Lincoln removed McClellan as the commander of the Army of the Potomac and replaced him with General Ambrose Burnside. Now, Ambrose Burnside, which, by the way, if you look at his picture, you can probably tell where we get the term sideburns from. But he had been offered this command by Lincoln twice before, but had refused, doubting that he was capable of leading the army. But now that he was in charge, though, he was eager to prove to Lincoln that he was going to be much less timid than McClellan had been in pursuing the Confederates. So by mid-November of 1862, Burnside had his army marching south once again, heading for the Confederate capital of Richmond. In his path, though, there was the Rappahannock River and the small town of Fredericksburg, Virginia. General Robert E. Lee saw the Union Army's movement and rushed his troops to Fredericksburg. And just to the west of the town was this big, long, open field with a high hill overlooking it called Marie's Heights. And it just so happened that along the top of this hill, too, on Marie's Heights, was a stone wall. And so the Confederates dug in and had an ideal location to fight from above the battlefield. As Burnside's army approached Fredericksburg, they needed to cross the Rappahannock River in order to get into Fredericksburg. And so in order to do this, they needed pontoon bridges. Well, due to miscommunications, the bridges were delayed in arriving, giving the Confederates even more time to fortify their position and create an almost 3-mile-long front to fight from. Once the pontoon bridges arrived, the Union had to construct them under fire from Confederates that occupied the town of Fredericksburg. And on December 11th, the Union troops began crossing these pontoon bridges, while Confederates basically offered light resistance as they were marching into Fredericksburg, almost leading the Union Army towards really this trap that Lee had almost set for them. And so on Saturday, December 13th, Burnside ordered an assault on the Confederate position along Marie's Heights. The Union strength was right at around 120,000, while the Confederates were at around 80,000, making this one of the largest battles of the war. The fighting that ensued was an absolute disaster for the Union. Wave after wave of Union troops tried to cross this open field, the entire time being basically mowed down by Confederate artillery and Confederate troops behind that wall high on top of the hill. Actually, the Union attempted 14 frontal assaults against the Confederates, and they only broke through the Confederate line at only one location, but it just so happened that one location was under the command of Stonewall Jackson, and Jackson was able to organize a counterattack to push the Union troops back. And so by the day's end, there were over 12,000 Union casualties compared to barely 5,000 for the Confederates, and no ground had been gained. And that night, many of the Union troops had to sleep on the battlefield, laying there beside wounded and dead friends that had been fighting alongside them that day. And actually, this kind of gives birth to an interesting little story that happened here. As the Union troops were laying there wounded on the field, of course, they're crying out for help and for water. And one Confederate named Richard Rowland Kirkland, a member of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, was sitting behind the wall on Marie's Heights. And of course, he could hear all these Union troops crying for help. And he just felt like, I can't ignore this. I need to go help them. Even though they're my enemy, I need to go help them. So he goes and asks his commander if it's okay if he goes and helps these troops. His commander says to him, you know you're probably going to get shot if you do that. He says, I know that, but the commander says, go ahead and try. And so Kirkland gathers canteens from some of the fellow soldiers, and he jumps over the wall to help these Union troops. And he, from then on, becomes known as the Angel of Marie's Heights, as he was helping his enemy, even though he was putting himself at risk. So after these failed frontal assaults, Burnside decides to abandon this attack. And so they start to retreat. And this defeat absolutely demoralizes the Union. They had high hopes that after, Antietam, they might be able to shift the tide of the war in their favor. And Burnside, he's so humiliated that he resigns his command, and he's replaced by General Joseph Hooker. President Lincoln, he's extremely disappointed because, of course, his Emancipation Proclamation is about to go into effect on January 1st of 1863. And so now, Lincoln is desperate for a Union commander that is going to lead his troops to victory. The Confederates, on the other hand, now have gained optimism. They've now won a convincing victory against the full force of the Army of the Potomac. And so they're going to carry this optimism into 1863, and we're going to see that the Confederates are once again going to go on the offensive in 1863. So, with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.